Okay, so welcome everybody. I know it's been a minute since we had a State of the Reactor. That was my fault primarily because I was on a trip for a week in the middle of the month when we would normally have this um, with my father. And so here we are. So thanks for joining. We have a cool little presentation for everyone today. But before we get to that, I think we'll just do some housekeeping stuff. On my end and Dan's end, and a few other people. We're working on the docs, the public docs for V2, and those should be ready to go. They're coming along nicely now, and we should be able to get those out before we even launch, which would be good because that's something historically that we are always kind of dragging our feet on. So that's good. And then with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Craig for some audit and launch timeline updates.
Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to State of the Reactor. Let's see. Yes, so we'll talk through a little bit of status, and a lot of our status is focused on audits. We remain very security first in Tokemak, and we're in the midst of the security, the key security process that really defines a lot of our timeline and updates from here on out. So a few of those updates, we have talked about our Sherlock audit in the past, and that has now completed at the end of last month, and that kicks off a about 2-week period where Sherlock will go through deduplication of all of the issues that were submitted by all of their Watsons. Typically, those issues or any findings are submitted right at the end of the contest. Then judging, which is kind of like applying any kind of severity level to those issues. So we got those about mid this month, a couple weeks ago. Working through those now. I think overall what we've seen, and after talking with Sherlock, is pretty successful crowd competition. We had, according to them, Sherlock, about 100 more auditors or Watsons than they've had in any other contest. And so that's great for us. It means we get a lot of eyes on the contracts and hopefully a lot of quality eyes on the contracts, in addition to our lead Watson, who, for probably as a recap, is kind of like a more traditional auditor. He's specifically assigned to the contracts like a normal auditor would, and goes through them. And that complements the crowd auditors that are participating as well. So we are continuing to go through the findings or potential findings there to see if we agree with them. The next phase of this is we'll let Sherlock know which ones we feel like are valid, and in parallel, we're starting to fix anything that we see that is pretty straightforward. Once that period is done, then we'll schedule a fix review, and timing and length of that will be dependent on kind of how the rest of the finding review goes and what any fixes will look like. So that's Sherlock. In parallel, we were running a audit with Halborn. So Halborn completed formal verification, and we just received their more traditional or manual audit initial report back this week, and we're working through that now. Similar process to Sherlock. Want to review those and give them any feedback, confirm any issues that they find are valid, and then after we go through that process, we'll give them any fixes and they'll do a remediation review. So given the two of these things, there's quite a lot to dig through and try and assess how that will impact our timeline. I think we'll have a better idea probably in about 2 weeks. We'll keep everybody updated from that point on. Last thing on audits is our strategy audits to remember if this was all totally settled on the last state of the reactor. It's settled now. We'll work with Certora to perform formal verification and traditional audit, and they'll coordinate a crowd competition for formal verification specifically on our strategy contracts. The strategy contracts are a pretty critical piece of the system, weren't included in the major system audit as the team is worked on finalizing that architecture and the contracts themselves. And we're going to go into a lot of what that means or what that includes in the presentation later. But that's now all set, and we hope that begins next month. Feel good about that, although it is partially, the timing of that is partially dependent on fixes of the other audits. We want to make sure those are done in case there's an impact on the strategy audits themselves. Comprehensive maybe than some folks wanted, but we're kind of in the thick of this part of our development process now, and we'll keep everybody posted, and keep everybody posted on how that impacts our timelines going forward too.
Craig, not to give you a wild card here, but is there anything interesting? And I was going to ask Cody this question. Maybe Sam can answer it, but Cody's here. Is there anything that's worth mentioning about how the effectiveness, I guess, of not only doing the standard Halborn audit, but also getting a crowdsourced audit like the Sherlock audit in terms of just getting so many different eyes on it and so many different hands on it? Does that question
Yeah,
make sense?
for sure. With the Sherlock audit, you get so many eyes, and everybody takes their kind of own look at it. If you have one auditor, they have their own approach. They have kind of their own feel for the system, and you're gonna get you're gonna get that view of your contracts across all of them. Now with Halborn, you're gonna be for sure getting every single one of your contracts looked at in depth, but it's going to be by one, maybe two auditors. So you're gonna have that view. On Sherlock, you're gonna get a lot of the views from a lot of different auditors, and you're fairly certain that you're going to get every contract looked at, but it's not a guarantee. So kind of mixing the two, you get the kind of the best of both worlds. A lot of eyes, a lot of different approaches, while still getting every single contract looked at. And I will caveat on the Sherlock side that the senior Watson, does give you that every contract assurance as well. But still good to have both approaches. I think we did get a lot of value out of it.
Nice. That's great. Craig, do we want to, maybe we can just go straight into the presentation now, and then at the end, you can talk a little bit about the OpenUX thing.
That's great.
Okay, cool. So Ahuja, maybe you want to take it away.
Yeah, let me try this. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you well.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Are you guys able to see the screen?
I can't see it yet. No, actually. Let me try again. I could be wrong though. Can anyone else see it? There we go. Oh, it popped up there for a sec. Maybe it just took a second. Maybe there's lag.
It popped up for a second and then went away again.
I guess it's saying you may need to grant access, and which would require me to restart the app. So maybe it's better somebody else shares and I'll talk through it. Or I would have to log back in.
Yeah, does anyone else have it up real quick? I just have so many tabs up here. Give me 1 sec. 1 second. I got it. Okay, it's this one, right? This is our
Yeah,
latest. Okay.
that's right.
Do we start on slide 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. So here's our nice little Victor designed intro page.
Okay.
Good.
So yeah, so I wanted to give you guys an update on what we've done since the last back test, and also start with a recap of where we left things and so on. So if you move to the next slide, yeah, this one is fine. The one about that. Please go back. I think you have to go to slide 3 for one
Yeah.
sec.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it's clicking. It's not clicking. It's only clicking forward. All right, let's see if I can start this over again. Okay, very good.
Okay. Yeah. So so I want to give you a recap of what is the motivation behind autopilot. Then we'll talk through some of the interesting and special features in the autopilot that we've introduced that I think make it a more adaptive, dynamic system, and in a way learns the environment and adapts accordingly. And finally, we'll look at some updated backtest results, which fold in some of these new features. And in my mind, I guess it's and you'll see it too. It clearly shows the behavior and also the advantage of having autopilot do the LPing for you. If you move to the next one, please. So, just a quick recap. What is the LP's goal? The LP's goal is to make efficient use of his capital and obtain attractive risk-adjusted return. And, the more complicated the environment, the more dexes, the more trading pairs, the tougher it gets for somebody as an individual to be tracking them and trying to maximize their return. All of these change, frequently, and also as an end user on mainnet, you have gas and other things to be looking at. And so each of these costs change over time and makes it more and more complicated for an end user to be doing it. Next slide, please. So this slide shows, the opportunity set, or in a way, it sort of underlines the requirement for something that is automated. As you can see that if you look at any of these lines, actually, you'll see hops and peaks and troughs and local maximas and local minimas, and it kind of goes up and down, and you can't really know which is the line that you should be writing. You effectively want to write a line that's sitting on top of all of these, and then you have compounding that takes effect. So this is basically highlighting that of this pool set that we have, these 7 pools, you have a benefit if you were to be doing it in a autopilot sort of mode where some logic, some predetermined logic sort of optimizes the allocation for you. Next slide. So this again sort of reinforces the design goal. The goal of this product or the autopilot is to optimize the LP deployments. And the focus is on long term, but we could spin up any flavors of these. Effectively, though, the idea is that we are not looking for short term trends, but we're trying to follow long term trends and stable APRs that help you outperform. Next slide, please. So the autopilot, again, sort of, to underline the things that I mentioned before, there's so many different caveats and things to look at that for the end user, for example, there are things like gas cost, there's slippage we talked about, there's exit liquidity, so sizing the position based on the pool size. There is auto compounding of the rewards that you earn, the likelihood of APR stability. So as a user, if we see a 10%, how likely is it for that 10% to remain 10% and not go down to 0%? So there's smaller features inside our autopilot that look into that and adapt accordingly, and finally then show benefit at the top level. Next slide. So for the autopilot, I want to focus on three important sort of features. And the first one is the composite return metric. So this is the input that goes into the autopilot. Go to the next slide, please. So the composite return metric is made up of multiple components. So what we did was we said you have one number, you have a 10%. What is the source of that? So we went down to the source and we said, okay, there are X amount of divisions that could be made, and so we have the base APR, the fee APR, incentive, price return, which is basically capturing the peg and depeg of the asset, and then you have slashing costs. So slashing costs is, if a node operator got slashed, you would have a penalty that would remove from the backing and essentially cause a direct loss. And it's an instant loss, that would be harmful for the LPR. Next slide, please. So this shows the combining of the different components. So as you combine different components, you now have the flexibility. So this is the benefit of actually breaking them down. You can put it back together either by putting an equal weight on them, and you have one single number that is exactly reflective of that 10%. Or you can actually weight it differently. And you could say, I don't care about the incentives. I only want base and fee to be good. And you set it to 0 on the weight for the incentive, and that's what you get. And it's just a single knob change, a single weight change, and you have a different flavor. Similarly, you could say, I don't care about slashing because, it doesn't happen that often. I don't want you to react to that, and you could do that by zeroing it out. Price return, again, as I said, you could have a deep peg, before things were liquid at the beacon chain, you have illiquidity resulting in discounts. And if the discount widens, there's alpha to be gained if you wanted to follow it. And so in that case, you could say that, I want my price to be weighted 1, but I want price return to be weighted 1, but I want my base fee and incentive to be weighted at 0.5. So that sort of highlights and overweights the price return relative to the other components. So, next slide, please. The next thing relevant to the autopilot is that, once you have that input, so that's the input, the composite return metric is the input. And this is the key gatekeeper that goes inside the autopilot. So what it says is three components. It says X multiplied by R should be greater than C. X is the incremental return. So if you want to make a swap, you're expecting an incremental return, and you want to make back that any cost that is associated with that swap. So what it's saying is X times R is giving you the expected return over a certain period. That period is something that we define as the rebalance cost offset period. So over that duration, you want to make back what you lost, which clearly guarantees that you're not going to have NAV decay so drastically that it ends up being like a loss-making exercise. And I have a plot later on that shows some of that behavior. Should you try to ape things without really paying attention to the details, then you will end up decaying your capital pretty fast. So X times R is greater than C. C is the rebalance cost, which includes, it's an all-inclusive cost. It includes slippage, which can be substantial depending on size. Gas, which in our system is a mechanism that runs off-chain, and it proposes rebalances to the strategy or the autopilot contract. But we need this gatekeeping to sort of, put a sanity check on the proposals that are coming out of the solver. The solver in its existence needs to make fees and money. So that's why there's a margin associated with that solver. And that's a cost to the LMP strategy or the autopilot. We move to the next one, please. So this is now an extension on the previous slide. So we have a rebalance constraint that I talked about. It's a simple equation that we have up there. Now, how do you make it self-learning? So we could talk about why we want to make it self-learning. And so if you look at the left plot, you see that in that period on the left-hand side of the green line, there is a clear winner. There's one pool that's always winning, and anybody that sees it could track it and allocate to it. But as you move to the right-hand side, you see a lot of confusion and a lot of back and forth across different pools. And if you were to not pay attention and be careful about things, you would again cause a lot of damage to the capital that you're trying to allocate. So it's not obvious how to allocate in that regime. And so what I want to show is that, this is from a simulation on the right-hand side plot. You'll see that this is plotting the cost offset period. So again, going back to that previous slide, you see that X times R, and this is the R that we're talking about. And so this R is changing over time. And so that's how we make it adaptive. And so this is what I call as self-learning. So over the time, if there is a clear winner, then you start at 20. So you're giving it time to recoup the loss, and you start loosening that. So that's the loosen phase where you start loosening that, and now you um, have more time to be recouping that swap cost. And the reason you do that is because you're searching for this incremental APR. And so if you had a 50 bips of delta, and you are in that lose zone, you will see it and you will make that swap. Should there be nothing, you go up until what we allow as a maximum, and then at some point, if you don't find anything, that's fine. If you find something, you make that swap. Now, after that period, after the other side of the green line, uh, things as they start getting murky and you don't have a clear winner, at that point the self-learning logic would start tightening. So it'll basically make a few swaps and it'll see that, oh, it made a swap and then it had to reswap. And so that's how it self-learns. So it says, okay, this is not making sense. I'm not recouping my loss. I'm going to decay my NAV, so I need to tighten. And so it starts tightening. So it's almost like a fast attack, slow decay kind of mechanism. So it's fast in tightening, slow in loosening. And it's done by design, and it's done to sort of be conservative so that we don't end up, sort of causing a lot of damage to the portfolio. And if at all any. So again, the idea is that, all of this is based on the numbers that we are seeing prevailing and the environment and adapting accordingly. So the next slide, please. So this is showing some of the knobs, the main knobs in the adaptive logic. So the self-learning is sort of a supervised learning. So everybody knows about machine learning and data science and all of that. And this is a form of dynamic system which is allowed to learn the environment, but we train it or supervise it by giving it legitimate ranges. So the range for the rebalance offset is 7 to 30 days. We've been simulating with higher, lower numbers. This is kind of the current state and what we expect should nothing change. The init value is 20 days. And the up step, as I said, the loosening is slower and the tightening is faster. So it changes 2 days on the tightening, 1 day on the loosening. Next slide, please. Okay, so those covered the three main features that we wanted to talk about. They're all connected in the sense that, and I'll have a slide. I have a slide down below which details some of that connection between the three. But just to recap, there are three interesting ideas that are folded into the autopilot. There is a processing of the composite return, which combines things differently, and it also processes the individual components. So it filters the individual components based on, sort of trying to remove noise, and I'll share some of that. The other thing is that it does not greedily just try to find the highest APR. And the third thing is that it is adapting based on the environment. So it's one leg up, one step up from our, intelligent allocator that we've talked about before, that we've shared before in the previous run of backtest. So let me share some results and you'll see. So the goal of the backtest is the following. So we want to validate the strategy, of course, and we want to run it on real world data. So we have confidence that the strategy is outperforming and we can't do any better. And it's close to optimal, if not optimal, in the scenario that we are in. Additionally, the backtest with real data is meant to confirm the configuration. So the ranges that I talked about, the 7 to 30, or the tightening steps and the loosening steps, the weight that you want to put into the composite return metric, all of these things are things that we are trying to determine optimal values for. Additionally, there are a lot of features that are under the hood that we are not talking about. There is a special treatment done to the incentive token pricing. There's a special treatment done to how we make the incentive APR sticky. Should there be transitory gaps in the reward mechanism? So those things are done to reduce churn, and you'll see some of that churn figure in probably the next one. So next slide, please. So this is the summary of the specifics of the test that we've run. So we are looking at the trailing 12 months. There are 7 destinations in it. There's 2 balancer pools, 5 square pools. Again, the number is not important, and I would stress that you could run it with 50 pools, and you will not have any um, disadvantage, so to speak. So a human will not be able to track 50, but autopilot can obviously control and track as many as you would like. We have used representative destinations to sort of highlight some of the trade-offs involved in the comparables. So we have comparables for the backtest, which you'll take a look at. So the obvious one is each staking yield. It's the easiest thing that anybody could do, and they want to make it productive. They could stake it and get some return from it. The other thing is that somebody could say, oh, why do I really care about the autopilot? Can I not just, look up on the web page, on the UI, what is the APR, and just find the highest one and go in there? And maybe I set a threshold and I say, oh, if it gets above 1% or 0.5%, I'll make that switch. So we have a simulation for that to sort of counter that argument. And then additionally, we look at individual pools at the comparison. So effectively, should you say that I don't care about the environment and I know I have the big TVL pool, I'm safe there. I want to be in that one and I don't care about the rest of it. So we have individual pools that are shown as comparison. Finally, the rebalance cost is, done after careful analysis. We and putting in our sort of a rough estimate of the solver margin. So our best guess on the solver margin of 30%. And there's some details to be worked out there, but taking all of those things into account based on now that we have our contract in good shape, we have some rough estimates of the rebalance cost. So the gas that it would cost us, we have an estimate of what we expect the gas price to be, assuming we would be optimizing for the timing of the rebalance, and it would happen at times when the network is not busy. So somewhere in the midnight or those sort of time frames for typical rebalances. And then you have slippage, which is, taking into account how you swap and, what the size of the swap should be and what constraint we should put. So this is an educated guess of the rebalance cost because this is the C that we are simulating. And so it's impactful to get it roughly right, if not precisely. So that's what we've used here. Next slide. So this is the first set of results. So autopilot versus comparables. So left-hand side, you can see trailing 12 months. You start, the blue line is the autopilot, the red line is the ETH staking yield, roughly around 4.5-5% for the ETH staking yield. And for this period, given all the components, given all the price movements, and so on and so forth, given whatever slippage costs that it incurred in making the swaps, the autopilot outperforms substantially by 4.5. 4.63 is the excess return relative to the staking yield. So this is a low bar, but we are beating it handily. The next one is showing the other comparable I talked about. So somebody says, I just track the APR, I look at the APR and I just go to that pool. If you were to do that, you can see interesting dynamics here, right? So you look at the red one, which is a greedy, and the blue one, which is autopilot. And you can see that the red is tracking the blue for the initial portion of it. And this, if you were to draw the green line in that previous, APR plot that I shared with you, you will see that, because there is a clear winner, the greedy logic is, going somewhat similar to what the autopilot is doing. But at that point, when things start getting murky, is when the greedy logic gets pretty confused and goes back and forth. And as it goes back and forth, it starts burning NAV, net asset value. and effectively ends up pretty substantially underperforming. And you can see that the excess return of the autopilot relative to the greedy allocator down in the bottom table is 9%, 9.05%, substantial over 1 year period. Next slide, please. So this is the why slide, right? So I shared with you the greedy logic. This would give you a view into, again, why did we actually end up processing the input that goes into the autopilot. So we process the input. Additionally, we put constraints, right? So the processing is partly shown here. So if you look at the left side, you have partially filtered or smoothed out or noise filtered, whatever we want to call it, values of APR. So if you look at the black line, you'll see black or the blue. But if you look at the black line, you'll see that near the start of the period, you see a lot of up and down on the right side. That's the unfiltered. That's the raw value. That's because of the timing of the base APR and how it timing of the ETH backing update and so on and so forth. That causes jitter and up and down movement. And on the left hand side, you will see that it's pretty calm, relatively calm. Now, there are a few things that we don't filter, and that's for conscious reasons. We could have filtered it, but we chose not to filter it. So the base APR, the earnings from the yield, the staking yield, the earning from the fees are all pretty jittery, and we want to capture the long-term trend. So they are filtered. The incentive APR is our alpha. We want to catch as much as we want, and we want to react to it. So if we want to react to it, we don't filter it as much. We do massage the incentive pricing to avoid local tops, local minimas. Again, so you don't end up, going by a single day's price of the incentive token and then end up realizing that, it's actually was a local peak, and we end up seeing a crash after that. So for that reason, for reacting fast and doing that trade-off, this is kind of how we have. And so if you look at the blue or the red, there's noticeable difference, and that will prevent some of that wrong decisions that we make. So in combination with that tight gatekeeping, it sort of works hand in hand. If you go to the next slide, this was, again, the why continued. And so the previous why was that the input to the autopilot has been processed, and that is part of the specialized or expert automation that the autopilot brings. And so there's partly that, and then a human wouldn't be able to filter unless he was able to, he looked at so much data that he glosses over it. But the point is that all that jittery stuff now causes a lot of jitter in the allocation, and you can see that in the right hand side. So the greedy allocator is confused, and while this looks compressed, this is happening over days, and if you really wanted to optimize APR, you would end up causing a lot of churn. And if you cause churn, you cause slippage, because slippage is non-zero and positive, and along with gas, so you would pretty much have a lot of damage to the NAV or to the portfolio. So this describes some of the why we are substantially better than the greedy logic. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as an overview or a takeaway, while the numbers are not important, this is still a substantial enough, long enough period of trailing 12 months, which shows us the overall comparable performance that all of these have. So if you look at the autopilot, it achieves 9.6% over trailing 12 months. Staking yield is at 4.98. So that's about almost a double of what the staking yield is what the autopilot provides. And then, with the greedy allocator, there isn't much of a comparison, and it's almost 17 to 18 times more end result or autopilot performance relative to the greedy allocator. The next one now is also relevant, and it's important to look at, how would you have done if you were in just one pool. And so this is the performance that shows that. So over that period, and I have 4 pools here because those were the ones that were active throughout that period. Some of them came and went, and so for that reason, those are not included. But if you look at the ones that were always on or always alive in that period, you'll see that there is a noticeable, in fact, substantial, I would say 40% to almost 2x, so it doubles up relative to some of those individual options. So this clearly validates that you don't want to be aping and tracking and greedily trying to follow APR. But if you take the other extreme, which is just forget about updates and I just want to be in one, and then you end up noticeably and substantially underperforming the autopilot. So the autopilot has a handicap in this figure, and the handicap is that the autopilot suffers from slippage and rebalancing costs, and in spite of that, it outperforms these individual pools. The individual pools have no rebalancing costs; they're just just static allocations to those pools. So that was that, and I think that was the last slide. So that's what I wanted to cover. I guess that should be it. Thank you.
All right, that was amazing. Thanks so much for that, Aisha. I think that really kind of illustrates the optimism that we have for the effectiveness of autopilot. And that took a long time for him to put all that data together. So I just want to congratulate him. And I think Sam, some other people probably helped him on that. So that's a really great presentation.
Oh, I did forget that, I think Sam also may have some things to add. So I want to give him the chance. Yeah, this has been a collective effort. And Sam, do you want to add anything?
Thanks. No, I think that was great. I appreciate you going through that.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, that was incredible. And obviously, we are recording this, so if you guys need to go back and digest that again, that'll be possible. Craig, do you want to talk briefly about the open UX thing, and then we can talk quickly about testnet and close out?
Absolutely. Thanks again, Ahuja and Sam. Awesome work. I'll also add that as much work as it took to get this specific data together and in a presentable format, this team has been cranking on for quite a while to identify the things that are important, validate them through simulations and back tests. And so you're seeing just kind of like the tip of the iceberg even here. So it's pretty amazing to see, and I presume we'll be releasing a lot more of this as we get closer to launch. Let's see. So changing gears on the interface side of things and the product, the front end team has been working incredibly well, pulling together the whole end to end user experience. And I think a lot of you have been working with Victor already in the community to give feedback along the way. Now, a little bit in parallel and a little bit on a separate branch, we're starting to work with an external group called Open UX. And they were originally put on our radar by the Liquidity team, who has worked with them in the past and had really good things to say. So we talked with them, and now we're moving forward. This is a DeFi native group exclusively focused on user research and user experience research. And so far, it's been great. We've had a few meetings with them, and we're now kicking off a phase where we're actually starting those user interviews, and through all of the hard work of Victor and Chris and Nick, we now have a demo completely set up, ready for the user interviews. The Open UX team has recruited independent participants for these user interviews. They're all scheduled for next week already. And we'll be participating in or listening and observing, probably a little of all of the above, in these sessions. And the goal of this really is to ensure that we maintain a user-centric product design flow and process, and that we can continuously improve on that process. So these people are probably the best in the space to learn from. And I think a lot of the things that we go through will help us and enable us to continue to improve our own processes, even when we're not working with them going forward. I'll stop there. Victor and Chris and Nick are here too. Feel free to add anything, and I know you guys are really doing the bulk of the work here.
Actually, we don't have either of them on the stage at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Victor, I think Victor is getting washed out in New York at the moment.
Yeah, he's underwater.
He's underwater.
Not bags wise, just literally underwater.
So we're excited to show you kind of the outcome of this. I will add then for Vic, we are continuing to run user feedback sessions independently of OpenUX, and we'll continue to do that throughout the lead up to launch and even afterwards as we continuously refine the product and the UX. So for folks that haven't reached out to Vic already or somebody in the community, please do so if you're open to spending an hour of your time with us and giving us feedback. We'd love to engage. We'd love to learn from you.
And do we want to mention testnet, just that we're working on the rollout of that?
Yes, and that's again maybe Dan. Do you want to give an update? If we the timing of this will be dependent on what we started this call with, and that's a lot of the security review and the security processes. Dan and others have been really formulating the plan of trying to identify the goals and how we achieve them with testnet, including user feedback, which rolls into the open UX engagement. Maybe Dan, you can talk a little bit more about what you guys are thinking of.
We can't hear you, Danny boy. Check your mic
Give you
setting.
one more. Did he message?
No. No, we can't hear you, Dan. But check settings. I had to go and manually change my settings, I think. Oh, really? I guess somebody can hear him. I can't hear him.
I cannot.
No, I'm still not getting anything from Dan. I don't know if anybody else is. Sharp just decided to unmute so we could hear him cough. One thing I'll say maybe okay, maybe Dan will just give us a text update in the general chat after. But one thing I wanted to say that Dan brought up in the on stage chat was some of the things we've been talking about in terms of, and I know that presentation was pretty heavy data centric, but still obviously really important to see and to know. But a lot of the stuff that Paul and Sharp and Bruno and Dan and I have been talking about in terms of marketing autopilot is just to really sort of harp on the fact that despite all of the complexities that autopilot takes care of for you, we kind of abstract away all those complexities, and it's a really simple thing for people to come and supply their ETH and get the most advantageous sort of positioning for that. So despite the complexities, it's a really simple thing for everybody to have access to. And so I think that's probably going to be kind of the primary thing that we drive home to the broader audience. I don't know if Manuel or anybody else wants to kind of reiterate on.
Yeah. I also just wanted to highlight that chart that I was displayed, where you compare the individual performance of a static exposure to a single pool versus the autopilot performance. It really validates what we're working on here. And furthermore, if you just increase the sample size and include more pools, you also improve the performance of the autopilot because there are more choices to make. So even with this small set of pools, I think that the results are super compelling. And it's also important to view this product as an evolve that is adaptive to new pools that appear for a given criteria of LSTs and indexes. And that's super exciting for people that want to have optimal exposure to ETH LST pools.
Awesome.
There was a
yeah, go ahead.
there's a question in the chat here from somebody with the branch logo and a backwards ND in their username, which I'm sure there's a way to pronounce, about how these kind of results would compare versus ETH pools that auto compound. And I wonder if that means kind of LST pools. I'm not sure, but I think Sharp's comment there probably applies to just about any set of pools that we want to include in autopilot, and kind of the wider set of pools that are included in the strategy. Sort of there's the more opportunity there is for there to be variances between returns on any set of pools. And that's really where the autopilot shines, is making sure that the user is always in the optimal pool, even as those different pools change over time. And so if all pools are yielding sort of on both sides, and all those pools have rewards that can be compounded, we're going to capture those for the users and make sure that gets added back into their underlying value. So, maybe that helps. I'm not sure. You can let us know.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, great. This is kind of a long one already, but I think that this is all really good stuff. Obviously, we'll have this recorded so everybody can re-listen, share it, and we'll share it on our Twitter. And just want to thank everyone for coming again to another State of the Reactor. We're all pretty pumped, getting closer and closer to the launch of this thing. So we appreciate everybody bearing with us while we do all the necessary due diligence to make sure that this thing is safe for everybody. It's the number one priority. But it's going to be a really, really awesome thing. So is there any other last words, as Craig likes to say in every single one of our meetings? Any final thoughts from anyone before we close out? Take that as a no. Okay, cool. Then we'll end it here. Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it, as always.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.